Okay, Circle the Dark Mother meeting for November 2023. Topic Mesopotamian witchcraft with the goddess Lilith. So for those of you who don't know me, I am a consecrated bishop in the independent and Gnostic tradition. I have a master's in theology. I've been studying Kabbalah and been a devotee to Lilith for over 20 years now. I think it's close to 22. And I'm the author of Embracing Lilith, Embodying Lilith, and the forthcoming Empowering Lilith. So let's talk a little bit about Mesopotamia, and there's going to be a little bit of history because we have to do that first to get to the point of being able to talk about witchcraft in Mesopotamia. If you have any questions as we're going, please don't hesitate to ask. Jump in. I'll try to bring the chat up too, so if there's anything there, I can also answer it. So as you can see on the left, I have a diagram of some different time periods. And what we want to talk about is how truly ancient Mesopotamia is. Mesopotamia, of course, is the area north of the Persian Gulf, which used to encompass from there all the way north into Turkey, what is now Turkey, to the west toward Persia, and toward the east toward what is now Jordan and Jerusalem and Israel. So Mesopotamia is one of the oldest cultures we know of. As you can see from this diagram, Sumerian culture started about 4,500 BCE. But there were cultures before that. One that's very well known is the Ubad culture, which lasted several hundred years prior to the Sumerians. Excuse me. And it was a language or pre-written language culture. So we don't know a lot about them, but we do believe they started a lot of the things that were picked up in Sumer. For instance, they already had pottery, they already had cities. The city of Uruk, in fact, was already started before the Sumerians came to Mesopotamia. And if you look at this chart, what's truly amazing is the fact that Sumerian culture starts about 4,500 BCE, but we don't see anything in the Greco-Roman culture until we see the Minoans at about 2750. So as you can see, when we think of Sumer or Mesopotamia, it's truly ancient because the Greek classical period is what we usually think about when we talk about, Greco-Roman culture. But Sumerian culture had already been around for about 3,500 years before that. So really, really ancient. The only other cultures that were around was Egypt soon after this. There were pre-Stone Age culture there too. There's also culture in the Indus Valley, what is now Pakistan, part of India, and also a little bit in China. But beyond that, most of the other cultures were still in their infancy. One of the interesting things too is Sumerian language is its own language group. And what that means is that there are no modern languages or any written languages that we found that are related to Sumerian. Their language is completely isolate and different than anything else we've ever seen. Later on, though, after the Sumerians were around for a while, they of course started writing with cuneiform a little bit before 3,500 BCE, but it was pre-cuneiform. It was basically pictures. Cuneiform didn't start until a little bit after 3,500 BCE. But eventually, the Akkadians and then the Assyrians came in and took over. They invaded. Akkadian and Assyrian languages are actually Semitic. So they're related to Hebrew, they're related to Arabic, they're related to other languages in the area. So those languages have similarities to known languages. However, Sumerian is completely different. We truthfully don't know where the Sumerians came from. They called themselves the black-headed people. We don't know if that meant that they were, dark-skinned, dark-haired, whether it referred to something of a spiritual nature. We do know that when they depicted themselves as brown, but not like we would see in African cultures. There is a possibility they either came from Turkey or from the Indus Valley, but it's really unknown. We have no idea at this point. One of the other things to know is that, you know, the Sumerian and related cultures are so ancient, but the Jewish people were in exile in Babylon from 605 BCE to 539 BCE. And that's because at the time, Babylon, which was an offshoot of the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Assyrians, eventually the Babylonian period, Babylon invaded Judah, which was the Jewish country at the time, and they took all the religious leaders and the political leaders into exile into Babylon. So there was about 70 years where they were there, a couple generations worth, and there was a lot of cultural exchange. Around 500 BCE, Persia invades and wipes out the entire Mesopotamian culture and religion. Now, it doesn't happen overnight. They bring their culture, they bring their religion, they bring their language, and it takes time for the others to die off. But the end of the empire happens at around 500 BCE. So most of what we know about the period is either from the writings of the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Assyrians, or the Babylonians, or from other cultures, you know, talking about them. So Mesopotamian magic. The cultures of Mesopotamia practiced magic as part of their day-to-day culture. In fact, when you study anything of the writings or anything about reading about the culture, they really lived their spirituality. They believed it was integrated into everything they did. So it is sort of hard to pull apart their spirituality from their day-to-day lives. But the literature and archaeologic evidence shows that they used fire, astrology and astronomy, crystals and stones, oils, herbs, incense, and many other items that we also see in magic in other cultures. A lot of the writing we have from their spiritual stuff are really incantations. Some of them are incantations of exorcism, and some of them are incantations for other things to happen. Exorcisms were a really, really big part of their culture, but we have to understand they didn't see demons or spirits the way we do in Western culture, or at least in traditional Western culture. And we'll talk a little more about that coming up as we get into some of the deities. Each city had its own set of deities, either one or a pair, and these were the protectors of the city and the main ones being worshipped. But there were hundreds and hundreds of other gods and goddesses that were worshipped by individuals or used for specific magic practices. So even though the cities have the most well-known ones, there were other gods and goddesses all over the place and used heavily. Scholars have found many of the practices we see in what we call the Old Testament or the Torah were actually begun in Mesopotamia and then either adapted or adopted into Judaism. And a couple of these are the practices with oil. When they do anointing with oil in those scriptures, it follows very closely to the way they work with oil in Mesopotamia. The Psalms are actually incantations and songs, just like they used in Mesopotamia. And then the Song of Solomon, for instance, which is a semi-erotic piece in the Old Testament that talks about, it starts out with a female presence saying, "I am black and comely." That actually follows almost exactly a hymn to Ishtar, or Inanna, as she was known in the earlier cultures. So a lot of cultural things intermixed between the cultures. One of the big things that they had was called the Ladder of Lights. And this is something that comes out of the fact that the ancient Mesopotamians were very aware of the night sky and the heavenly bodies that inhabited it. In fact, if you look at a lot of their artwork, there are pictures of the moon and stars and planets. They were really skilled astronomers and astrologers, considering, we're going back to 4500 BCE. They knew a lot about the night sky. One of their primary practices that merged astronomy, astrology, and their spirituality was called the Ladder of Lights. This Ladder of Lights has 8 rungs or 8 spheres, and these have to do with the first 8 bodies in the solar system. So they're Earth, Moon, Sun, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. So the first 8. Ladder of Lights was later adopted by the Jewish people, and it combined their Merkava mysticism, which is throne chariot mysticism, with the Ladder of Lights. And that produced what we now call Kabbalah. And if you know anything about Kabbalah, there's 10 spheres, which do represent in our universe the same heavenly bodies I just mentioned, plus a couple more, because they have 10 instead of 8. And the spheres in the Ladder of Lights are said to be aspects of deity. The primary deities are all assigned to one of these ladders or these rungs I named. And then they're also a bridge to heightened consciousness. It was a path to raising one's consciousness. In ancient Mesopotamia, there were a couple different kinds of magic practitioners. In Akkadian, there are several words that then get changed a little bit in Assyrian, but very close, because again, they're sister languages. There is one word that means the official priest or priestess, which was called a kalu. They were also usually exorcists, and they would cast out evil spirits or get rid of spirits that were causing harm. But the unofficial magic users, which are basically witches, is what we would call them, were called kasaptu and kasapu. With the T as female and without the T as male. There were by far more kasaptu than kasapu, but they did both exist. Over the periods of Mesopotamia, they are sometimes considered good, sometimes they're considered evil, but we know this is typical of many other religions that demonize those that are outside of the religious hierarchy. So the kasaptu and the kasapu were more like folk medicine people, and they did things not according to the way the temples wanted it done. So early on, they were more accepted, and as time goes on and the religious hierarchy becomes more dogmatic and truthfully patriarchal, they lose a lot of their favor. And there's in fact hymns about stopping a kasaptu or a kasapu from cursing somebody, which I'm sure they could do, but in the earlier years, it was more that they were like healers and support for people, where later on they were more demonized. So Lilitu. You'll notice the name Lilitu is very similar to Lilith, and that is because Lilitu is an Akkadian and Assyrian name, which again is Semitic, just like Hebrew. And so Lilitu in Hebrew becomes Lilith. She's a goddess that exists with a different name, which we'll talk about in a minute, in Sumeria, but also in all of these later cultures. She's associated originally with winds, then with night. She's also associated with sexuality, and sometimes she's seen as good and sometimes not. She is both a goddess and a demon. And the way that works, because in Christianity and Judaism, you don't really have that option. But see, gods are entities that are descended from the primordial pair of deities, which Lilitu is. But she's also a demon, because a demon is any god or spirit who doesn't follow the rules that the gods and goddesses put together. And there's many demons that are also gods or goddesses. Then there are spirits that are demons because they don't follow the rules, and other spirits that are not demons. But this word demon is a translation from the ancient languages and does not mean the same thing as we hear in Western culture. The same thing with, you'll hear the word prostitution thrown around too, because there's sacred prostitution. That is not the same meaning that we have in English. I have nothing against prostitution. That's not, there's no ethical question here. But the difference is that in Western culture, we think of prostitution as a means of earning money, where prostitution in ancient times, I'm sure there was that too, but the sacred prostitution had to do with transfer of energy that was sometimes sexual, but it was very much like what Eastern tradition would call tantra. And it has to do with, really connecting to the gods and spirituality through sometimes physical acts and sometimes just purely spiritual. So you'll hear people say that Lilith is not a goddess. They'll say that she was a wind spirit. And this is a widespread belief. And the reason is there were Lilu and Lilim, which were wind spirits. The Lilu were male and the Lilim were female. And these were wind spirits that were in the desert. Sometimes they were sexual entities, sometimes not. And there's a whole bunch of names for different entities that start with Lil. Lil means wind in Akkadian, and is associated with wind and night later on. So some of the names have to do with wind, some with night. But there is a document that was written in the Assyrian period, and I'm sure I will mispronounce this, but it's Anda Nu'um and An Anu Sa Ameli. And that's transliterated to English using our letters, even though it was originally written in cuneiform. That list only contains gods and goddesses. And there is an entry with the Sumerian name, and Sumerian only uses syllables. They don't use letters. So the syllables are Dim, Mi, Gi, or Dimmi, G. And the Assyrian name then is Lilitu. So this entity called Lilitu, originally Dimmi Gi, is a deity because she would not be in the god list if she wasn't. Dimmi Gi loosely means deity of the night or deity of the wind. And then in Sumerian, in Akkadian, her name means of the wind or she who comes by wind. Later on, it's translated in Assyrian more to do with night. So that's how she sort of goes from wind to night. She is associated with sacred prostitution, and that's why sexuality is another part of her attributes. There are several deities that appear later, post-Sumer, either in Akkadian, Assyrian, or Babylonian, that have a lot of attributes that are very, very similar to Lilith. And so the question is, are they aspects of her or are they separate deities? And we really don't know because the Mesopotamians believed in separate entities and they also believed in entities that were aspects of each other. It's a lot like Hinduism where there are separate gods and goddesses, but there is a belief that there is a sort of a deity behind the scenes. And then some of them are also manifestations of another one. So for instance, Kali manifests out of the goddess Durga, and they are considered separate entities, but they are connected at the same time. So we don't know for sure which of these entities are aspects of Lilitu and which are not, but they do have a lot of things in common. So let's talk a little bit beyond Mesopotamia. So because Mesopotamia is located centrally at the Persian Gulf, they had trade and culture exchange with many other civilizations. In fact, they had trade with Egypt, Indus Valley. They had trade with a whole bunch of countries and cultures throughout the area, and eventually places that were way beyond. With these exchanges, Lilitu makes her way into many other cultures. She's mentioned in different ways in the Canaanite spirituality and culture. There's also a goddess that's associated with her who becomes the goddess Ketesh in Egypt. She comes from Mesopotamia, moves into Canaan, and then gets transferred over to Egypt. And if you see any of the iconography of her, she looks a lot like the Sumerian goddesses, standing on an animal, her arms upraised, and a crescent moon on her head. So very, very similar to some of the iconography from Mesopotamia. Of course, the most notable migration of Lilitu is into Jewish religion and spirituality. And, as I said, Babylon invaded Judah, taking many of the spiritual and political leaders into exile. During this period, Lilitu was renamed Lilith and demonized because, of course, in Judaism, there is actually a divine feminine. In early times, it's Asherah, and later on, it's associated with Shekinah, God's presence and power. But they don't take gods or goddesses from other cultures. They're always demonized, like Baal and others. So Lilitu was renamed into Hebrew as Lilith, demonized, later being called Adam's first wife, and also in some of the Jewish texts in Kabbalah, she becomes the sometimes consort of God Most High. The attributes of several Mesopotamian goddesses and demons were synchronized into Lilith. The biggest one being Lilith was never associated, or Lilitu was never associated with killing babies or terrorizing mothers. But the goddess Lamashtu was associated with killing babies and cursing pregnant women. She was a goddess and a demon, very, very harsh goddess and demon. And they would actually exorcise her by using the head or a representation of Pazuzu. Pazuzu being a god of pestilence and grain in Mesopotamia. He has sort of a disturbing looking face. He was later brought in as a demon, and he is the inspiration for the character, which is named Pazuzu as well, in The Exorcist. But the original god demon, was used to cast away Lamashtu. So Lamashtu is not Lilitu. They are not the same being, but much of what she was synchronized into Lilith when she came into Judaism. So let's talk now. We're going to talk about the ladder of lights and the different rungs on the ladder. And I'm not going to, the first one I'll probably focus on a little more, and we'll go a little faster into the other ones because the representation will be the same. As we go, there'll be different specifics, but the generalities will be the same. So rung one is Earth, and that's the lowest rung because that's where we are. It's the place that the Mesopotamians lived as well. There is a color for each of these. This color is either multicolored or earth tone. The incense or plant suggested is Dittany of Crete, lily, carnation, or narcissus. The stones of it are the garnet or the moonstone. The focus for this rung is sexuality. An alternate aspect, because I work with Lilitu exclusively, each of these did have a major Sumerian or Mesopotamian god or goddess, but I'm working with this as Lilitu. That's the focus of this. But an alternate aspect could be the Akkadian Lili. Her name meant woman in the window, and she's a fascinating goddess demon in Mesopotamia. She is pictured as looking through the window. She is sometimes pictured as an owl or with an owl, and she would look in the window to engage in sacred sexuality with people. She was considered a handmaiden of Ishtar, which some texts say Lilitu is also. Ishtar being the main goddess of love and war, and Nana in her Sumerian form, Ishtar later on. Nana starts out pretty passive, but as time goes on, she becomes more warlike and aggressive as Ishtar. And at some points, they associate Lilitu and some of these other goddesses with her. We don't quite know what it means to be a handmaiden, but it's a goddess associated with Ishtar. Optimum timing for working with rung one is Friday, and there is a Mesopotamian month that fits the witches' Sabbats, and this one is Kanun. And the example method I would use, now you can use any method you want, but an example I might use for rung one is candle magic. And in fact, on my YouTube channel, I'll have a separate video for each rung, But candle magic, I do a lot of candle magic where I either put a picture of whoever I'm working with on the front of the candle, or I scratch something into the candle. I do a ritual, I light the candle, and then I usually use like a 7-day, because that lets it burn down and the energy, flows through for those 7 days. The next rung is rung 2, which is the moon. And this one, the color is purple. The incense or plant is jasmine, comfrey, camphor, or aloe. The stone is rhodonite. The focus is dreams. And dreams don't have to be dreams you have at night. They can also be dreams and things you want during the day. An alternate aspect beyond Lilitu, the Sumerian name is Kisikililaki, or the Akkadian name of Lilaki. The meaning of this name is maiden of desolation. And this is the aspect of Lilith that appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where she's in a tree with a zoo bird on the top and a serpent around the bottom. And Gilgamesh comes to cast them out because Inanna wants this tree to make a bed and a throne out of. Interesting story. It actually reads like a Mesopotamian exorcism. Really interesting too that Inanna couldn't go do this. She's one of the primary goddesses, but for some reason she couldn't cast Lilaki out, and it took Gilgamesh. Optimum timing for this rung is Monday. The Mesopotamian month is Adar, which is around the 1st of February. And an example method might be crystal or stone magic. And that's where you learn the properties of a crystal or stone and then use them in your ritual. And in fact, we are going to use stones in the ritual I'm going to do here in a little bit. Rung 3 is Mercury. The color is orange. The incense or plant is storax, orchid, or peyote. The focus is prophecy. The stones are iolite or labradorite. The alternate aspect is the Akkadian Abtagigi. And the meaning of her name is she who sends messages of desire. And again, that can be sexuality, but it can be other kinds of desire. They in Mesopotamia, they really didn't distinguish between sexual desire and other desires. And in fact, Mesopotamia was pretty open sexually, without some of the hangups that later cultures have. The optimum timing is the day of the week is Wednesday, and the Mesopotamian month is Nisan, which takes place around the spring equinox. And an example method could be scrying with a pendulum, scrying with a crystal ball, scrying with water. And in fact, the way they would do scrying in ancient Mesopotamia is they would fill a bowl with water and then scry above the water. The water would be holy water that had been blessed, and they would scry above it so that the energy of the water would help with the scrying. Rung 4 is Venus. The color is green. The incense plant is rose, laurel, sandalwood. Focus is love. The stone is rose quartz. An alternate aspect is the Sumerian name Ki El Lilala. Her Akkadian name is Ardat Lili. It is unclear whether Ardat Lili was a spirit, like one of the Lilu or Lilan, or whether she was a goddess. There seems to be comments both ways. So she might be a demigod. Her name, Ardat Lili, means handmaiden of Lila, which is an alternate name for night and could be translated as handmaiden of Lilith. So she may be considered a daughter of Lilith. We again don't know. An optimum timing for this is Friday at dusk, and the Mesopotamian month is Yar, which is around 5/1. A great method for this is a spell bottle. And when I work with a spell bottle, I take a jar, like I take half-size canning jars that haven't been used, and I put a picture of whoever I'm working with or what represents what I'm working with. I then put herbs in and maybe stones that match what I'm trying to do. And then I put oil and holy water from my altars. So water that's been sitting on my altars into the bottle. I then put it on my altar. I put a candle on it. I light it during the ritual and I let it burn down, so it seals the bottle. And then I store that or bury it, and that becomes the the movement of the ritual I'm doing. Rung 5 is the sun. The color is gold and yellow. The incense and plants is frankincense, sunflower, acacia, chicory, lovage, marigold. The focus is abundance. The stone, which was very, very holy in Mesopotamia, is lapis lazuli. The alternate aspect, her Akkadian name is Bariritu, and the meaning of her name is dusk. Bariritu is almost identical in her iconography to Lili. She's pictured as looking in through a window. She is said to be a sacred prostitute. She's called a handmaiden of Ishtar, and she's sometimes associated with an owl. Bariritu, and I think Lili as well, there are depictions of them in Ishtar temples from Mesopotamia. And what they are is they're stone relief or wood that is cut out to look like a window with a woman's face looking in it. They're very, very interesting. So she was Bariritu and Lili were worshipped in with Ishtar and Inanna. The optimum timing, the day of the week is Sunday. The Mesopotamian month is Tammuz, which is around the summer solstice. And an example method is a Lilith communion ritual. And I actually have an example of this on my YouTube channel. A Lilith communion ritual is using bread and wine, but it's not quite like you would see in Christianity. Communion or bread and wine rituals are ancient. They were used in Mesopotamia. They are used in Egypt. And in fact, the first example of it in Judeo-Christian tradition is in the Old Testament, where in the Torah, where Abraham and Sarah meet with this priest king called Melchizedek, and they use bread and wine. And Abraham and Sarah get their names at that point. They used to be Abram and Sarai, and they become Abraham and Sarah at that point. So this Lilith communion ritual is really to take in the energy of Lilith, and it uses bread as a symbol of her and wine as a symbol of her fire. You join them together and partake of them. And in the same tradition that would have been done to some way for centuries. And we don't know exactly how the Sumerians did it because there's not a lot of records, but we do know that they did have rituals with bread and wine. Rung 6 is Mars. The color is red. The incense or plant is tobacco or cactus. The focus is protection. The stones are black tourmaline or obsidian. The alternate aspect is the Sumerian name Dim-mi-a or Dim-mi-a. This is very similar, as you see, to what Lilith's name or Lilitu's name was in Sumer. She starts with the Dim-mi but has the G-I at the end. Dim-mi is a prefix used to mean god or goddess. Not all of them have that as part of their name, but it does mean god or goddess. So Dim-mi-a or Dim-mi-a may be a sister of Lilith. Remember, they're descended from the primordial gods and goddesses, so they could be related. And the Akkadian name for this goddess is Labasu. Don't confuse that name with Lamashtu. Lamashtu is the very, very dark baby killer. Labasu is much more like Lilith. Her name means she who comes at night, and she's associated with sacred sexuality and nighttime. Optimum timing for this rung is Tuesday, and the Mesopotamian month is Tadabaka. I have trouble pronouncing that one, and it's around August 1st. A good example for this one is to use oils. And I will use oil to anoint myself. I will anoint other people. I will even anoint pictures. And the idea is the oil represents some kind of spiritual energy being brought down and put into something. Used very heavily in Mesopotamia. They used oils a lot. Rung 7 is Jupiter. The color is blue. The incense plant is heliotrope, jasmine berries, opium poppy, water lily. The focus is health. The stones are citrine and carnelian. The alternate aspect, the Akkadian name is Lili. Now there's two Lilis in Mesopotamia. There's a newer goddess, the Lili, who's the sister of Tammuz, who Tammuz or Tamuzi, depending on the culture, is the consort to Inanna and Ishtar, and the Lili is his sister. But there's a more ancient Lili who's mentioned early on, who's a goddess of the moon and the underworld, previous to mentions of Ereshkigal, who's Inanna's sister. An interesting thing about the name Lili, and actually Lila too, is scholars have named a language that they don't know anything about called the banana language. And the reason they call it that is because there are names that pop up in Mesopotamian traditions that don't match any of the naming schemes in Sumerian, Akkadian, or Assyrian. And the reason they call it the banana language is because this language seems to have a fondness for a consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel, consonant, vowel. It's like the word banana. So the Lili is probably a pre-existing goddess, and so is Lilitu, based on their names, prior even to Sumer. So they could be goddesses that were there prior to 4500 BCE, could be part of the Ube culture or even earlier cultures. And this is probably not shocking, since goddesses of the original hunter-gatherers, what they found, the oldest stories always point to goddesses of night and the underworld, or goddesses of fertility. So any deity that really has to do with the darkness or with fertility and sexuality are probably ancient. So Lilitu and the Lili fit into that category. The optimum timing, the day week is Thursday. The Mesopotamian months is Tishrin, which is at the fall equinox. And the example method is burning intentions and herbs in a cauldron. So I will put a picture again, or I will put intention, something I want to happen. I will put herbs that match that intention, and I will burn it in my cauldron. And that's during a ritual, and that's a good practice to do. The last rung is Saturn. And the color for this one is black. The incense or plant is myrrh or cypress. The focus is mysteries of life and death. The stone is onyx. The Sumerian name, because I use Lilitu exclusively for this rung instead of the alternates. And her name is Demi-Gi in Sumerian, which is the Assyrian name Lilitu, and then of course Hebrew Lilith. The name meaning in Sumerian is deity of night, and in Assyrian it is she who comes by wind. The optimum timing is Saturday, and the Mesopotamian month is Akitu, which is around 11/1 or right around Samhain. And an example of this could be some kind of ritual to do with the dead. A really good one we did, we've done many around this time, but one we did was laying somebody out on the floor and covering them with a shroud, like simulating that they've died, and then anointing their hands and feet and their head with oil, and using them as sort of a conduit for those spirits that can't pass on, and helping them to help these spirits for their movement. There are many other things you can do. We've done dozens of different kinds of things, but something around Samhain is, of course, it's close to Day of the Dead. It's really good to do some kind of ritual with the dead or dying. So what I'm going to do now is a fairly basic Lilitu ritual that's going to incorporate some of these ideas. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do an opening. That's, of course, it's not exactly how it would have done in Sumer, because we don't know exactly how they did it in Sumer, but it's a reconstructionist working based on the kinds of things that they might have done, and it seems they did. At the middle of the ritual, I'm going to do a quick lighting of a candle and blessing it for all of you on the call. We're going to all be blessed with good things, and then anybody who watches it later. And I will leave that candle burning for 7 days so that that energy continues. After that, I will close the ritual. This won't be a very long one. I just want to show you sort of how some of this can look working in English. I am going to mute for a second. I'm going to finish getting ready for the ritual. We'll just take a minute. I'll turn the camera on and we'll go through it. So give me 1 second here, 1 minute. Lili, we call you. We ask you to come on the wind. Come through the night and be here with us. We ask you to cast out anything that should not be here, anything that is not here for your purpose, and let in any energy that is in your will, any that wish to partake. We thank you for your presence, and we will invoke the directions and give you our offerings. Up to Gigi! Up to Gigi. I offer you amethyst. This offering is for spirituality and contentment. Ardat Lili! Ardat Lili. I offer you lapis. This is for inspiration. Labasu! Labasu. I offer you black tourmaline for protection. Lili! Lili. I offer you garnets for love. Lilaki! Lilaki. I offer you serpentine for transformation. Lili! Lili. I offer you sultanite. And this is for intuition and perception. I offer you us, our devotion, our love, and our time and energy for you. Lilitu, all these aspects we have called upon are for you. We call upon you to be here with us. Fill us and fill this space with your presence. We ask you to bring your blessings, bring your energy, cover us in your dark wings of night. Illuminate us with the moon. Mother, Goddess, Queen, we thank you, we praise you. As I light this candle, I use it as a symbol for all that are here. I ask you, Mother Lilitu, to take this up in the wind, take it through the night, and give it to my brothers and sisters who are here with us virtually. Give them all of the power of these stones. Visit them with your dreams of intuition, your power of love, your enlightenment, your protection, your transformation. Everything that we have asked for, we ask that you give. And we return by being in this world, bringing your presence, giving your love and acceptance to this world. We thank you. As it is spoken, so it is done. Ardat, we release you into our hearts, taking this energy with you. The Lili, we release you to the heavens, asking you to take this energy with you. Lilaki, we release you to the earth and to the underworld and ask you to take this energy with you. Lili, we release you to the north and ask you to take this energy with you. Labasu, we release you to the west and ask you to take this energy with you. Ardat Lili, we release you to the south and ask you to take this energy with you. Abdagigi, we release you to the east and ask you to take this energy with you. Mother, Goddess, we thank you for what you have done and what you will do. We thank you for bringing your aspects here to work with us. I ask that you take these prayers, you protect and bless. I ask that you change this world for the better, bringing your power of transformation to the people in the land. We thank you and we praise you. Okay, that's the completion of the ritual. I wanted to see if there were any questions or anything anybody wanted to ask about with the, of course, the Mesopotamian tradition, or anything else that you'd like to discuss. You can come off mute or you can type if you wish to. Okay, well, thank you. We'll be back next month with something different. Every time it's different. Sometimes it's Lilith, sometimes it's not. We also have guest speakers that come and speak. And it's really topics that people want to hear. So if you have any topics you'd like to hear or see, shoot me an email. I will include our website in case you haven't seen it. Circulus Matrum, which is Circle Mother, short for Circle of the Dark Mother. So thank you, many blessings, and hopefully this was interesting and something you enjoyed. Take care.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.